welcome everybody to season 2 of Autistics Unscripted. I'm excited to be here today with Bowie of Rainbow Chrysalis Coaching. And I love their job title. They are a coach and gender doula. And I just love that term. I think it's so amazing. So would you tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you. So as far as the gender doula side of things, that's something that I've kind of been doing for a while, both informally and formally since I came out as trans and went through my own gender transition. So that can be anywhere from like helping people to figure out identity stuff, navigating coming out with family and friends, or if they even want to, because you don't have to do anything. Medical transition, and just like guiding people through that big journey that is a gender transition. But I also like to say that like I can work with cis people too who like want to kind of free themselves from the gender binary a little more, because it's rigid and limiting for everybody, in my opinion. So
yeah, I love that. Yeah. I mean, I'm biased, but I think everyone could benefit from that kind of exploration, even if they're like, okay, I came back around to, yes, I am a cis person. Like, still that process of exploration and kind of self-questioning, I think that can be a valuable process. So that's great. I love to hear that. And so you are a business owner. You are also neurodivergent, I think late identified. You want to share a little bit about coming into that part of your identity?
Yeah. And I guess first I want to say that like the second half of what I offer is also like neurodivergent support, like for ADHD, autism, other identities, of like just helping people kind of like let go of shame and figure out what works for them, incorporating a lot of play. And I guess what ties in both of those, kind of to answer your question, is like I'm trans and neurodivergent, and these are journeys I've been on, and it's all about like a lot of it does feel like releasing like other people's expectations, and then like, okay, what tools do we need to live authentically?
Yeah, I think so many of us have that similar experience in that. Like, I always think about it like archaeology. I totally wanted to be an archaeologist when I was a kid, and I would like dig around my backyard. But I think about like those of us who are kind of late bloomers in life, right? And coming into autistic or ADHD identity, coming into queer and transness later in life. I feel like we're these beautifully carved figurines that like over time have been caked over with clay and mud. So like the shape is no longer identifiable, right? And when we do the work like with a coach who's kind of like our self-archaeologist, we're stripping those layers of stuff that have been glommed onto us to find like the ultimate, oh my gosh, this is a beautiful, ornately carved thing that is extraordinary and looks so much like it looked like a lump of dirt before, and now we see its true form. And I think that's it's so thrilling to be in the liberated space of like casting off all those layers of mud and gunk that have, like you said, have been imposed by external sources, whatever that is.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's like that.
I love that metaphor.
Yeah, just channel some Indiana Jones, except not like the stealing and appropriating other cultures things part. Yeah, becoming ourselves. And I love the term doula. I have known a number of birth doulas. I follow the work of a number of death doulas, and just being in this role of like ushering someone through a process. I think doula is such a beautiful term for that. You know, as we think about like walking alongside someone and cheering them on,
Mm.
providing support, helping them to remember to breathe. Right? Like all of these things are like you create this container for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
How is it for you? So navigating kind of these different parts of your identity and like entrepreneurship. um yeah, what are some kind of like challenges that have come up for you, and then also ways that you're like, wow, the way that my brain works really serves, you know, work
Mm.
in an amazing way.
Yeah. Oh, well, one of the things that is challenging for me is figuring out the technology side of things. And like I think it's just the new technology things of like making a website and like figuring out like, oh my gosh, I was so stressed with social media when I was trying to like make a TikTok video and then also put it on Instagram. I think I finally figured out a process that works for me, but at the beginning it was frustrating.
Yeah.
um so I think it's also just like remembering, and also like I feel like I'm my own first patient, so or not patient, client. Like I
Yeah.
do the work on myself first, so it's like okay, it's okay to like not get everything right away, and
Mhm.
like need to take my time and take the deep breaths, as you say, and like and it all finds a way. So and it's in my
Yeah.
own pacing.
Yeah.
Um And then I think on the flip side, I think it's helpful that like these are things that are kind of special interests of mine. So I just really like reading about them and learning about them and researching and hearing different people's perspective. And I'll be like, ooh, I agree with that part, but not this other part of what you're saying. And like, I think there's more nuance here. And of course, like I always like to tie in like the systems in place
Um,
because for me, I'm like, okay, like I'm like, how much am I gonna get into this right now? But um I guess for me, I'm like, even with like these terms like ADHD and autism, I think they're so helpful. And like like identifying with them can be so liberating. And I also like so I hold that, and then I also hold on the other hand, like we're, right now speaking in English, which is a language that has been used for colonization, and it's embedded in the language. And then
yeah.
it's also like there's the history of psychiatry, which has helped a lot of people, but also harmed a lot of people and has
Hmm.
some structural issues. And so
Yeah.
like we're using the best terms we can within the system. That's how I view it. And it's like I don't think we should throw the terms out. I think that's taking it too far from my perspective, but I think just holding the both and.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Whew, like that speaks to my soul because I'm always like going on a soapbox about the both and, right? Like and I think that like that is at the core of non-binary truth, right? Like outside, beyond gender, across the board, like
Yes.
life is not binary. There is so much both and also whether we're talking about emotions. I talk with folks about this all the time. Like, we can be feeling multiple things at once, and oftentimes we only communicate one of those things, which can sometimes create buckles in the communication because, like,
Mm.
like I'm not in this situation. And also, I understand where you're coming from. And also, like, I'm probably maybe a little bit hungry too. And also, right, like, there's complexity there. And I think that it's just so thrilling to me to be able to be in spaces where get to name those complexities and invite other people into like being in their own complexity. I mean, that's part of the reason why I chose the name of my business, Expansive Expressions. And like expansive, like that is what we're working on. Expansiveness.
Like
Tell
the
me,
universe system behind you.
yeah, kind of like that.
Love it. Well, and actually, yeah, in response to what you're saying about communication and how imperfect it can be and how sometimes it's hard to like express all the layers of what's going on with you, that also makes me think about me like being late identified as autistic and how communication is a struggle. Yeah, I guess kind of going back to your earlier question, like I was diagnosed with ADHD in middle school because my mom brought me in. I don't think I would have been diagnosed otherwise because I was inattentive and like everybody thought I was a girl. So, and like they don't really diagnose girls as much or people they perceive as girls, and all the layers of that. But yeah, that process was not affirming for me. It felt very like not child-centered, and I was like, okay, the adults are telling me there's something wrong with me, and now I have these meds I need to take. And then it was just kind of like, that's it. Like I didn't feel like I got extra accommodations or support, but then later in life, it was helpful to have that language. Like when I was in grad school, I was like, oh, okay, I can like advocate for myself because I have this history in this language. So I have mixed feelings, the both and also about that. And then
Yeah.
more recently, I came into identifying as autistic through working with I had kind of wondered for a while, but then my current therapist is works a lot with neurodivergent people and would just be like, oh, like that thing you're doing, it's pretty autistic. They would say in a therapist-y way. And like, and I was like, oh, really? Okay. And like, and then finally we took some online tests together. I forget the website, but like, so there's like that website with the evidence-based tests, and then we talked through it. And
autism.
I believe so. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll put some links in the show notes so folks can find stuff.
Yes. Thank you. So yeah. And since then it's been really liberating for me. And like, I've learned a lot. I've like special interests, like dove in, and I've been reading the books and watching the videos and like all of the things. And yeah, I feel like especially learning about like my communication needs and how sometimes like what I think I'm communicating to the other person may or may not be coming across, and like how I need to like explain like what's going on for me. To like help clarify can be helpful. And also like a lot of people in my life are also neurodivergent and queer and trans, and there's an overlap there.
So just find each other magnetically.
We really do.
Well, I think there's so many parallels with like we'll dig into this. There's so many parallels with the experience of unidentified neurodivergence and the experience of not yet known queer gender expansiveness. And those are both my experiences too. Like I didn't come into my queerness until late 30s, came into my gender expansiveness and autistic ADHDness in my 40s, right? So it's a lot of life to live before understanding those. But one thing that was always clear was I don't fit. Yeah. I am the thing that's not like the others. I am the, whatever dodecahedron that's trying to get shoved into the square hole or whatever of those little like kid toy things. But yeah, so I think that's part of the magnetism. Like we find other people who have also had the experience of not fitting. And oftentimes there's those similarities of gender, neurodivergence, queerness. So yeah, like let's get into that. How those things play together.
Yes.
I
Oh
love
my
that you're
gosh.
dancing around.
I'm like, there's so much here. I could. Oh yeah. I so feel you on that feeling of like I don't fit. To me, it feels like actually I was like rewatching The Happiest Season, and I'm not gonna give anything away, but there's just one part where the one character is like sitting on a low chair. Like they all have like regular like chairs, and then the one character like they pull out an extra chair and they're like sitting down here, and like everyone's talking and they're like, where do I fit into this conversation? Like,
So relatable.
and I'm like, yeah, that feels like a metaphor that I relate with. Or just looking around and being like, okay, like they're all talking about football or this or that. And I'm just like, I don't care. Should I care? Should I try to care?
How do I make myself care? Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, and I feel like where it also ties back into the systems thinking is I feel like for those of us who are, I think in the ways that we are on the outside, because, with intersectionality, I think we all have ways that we have privilege and oppression and all of that, even just like with disability, with race, all the things. So I think that the ways that we are on the outside can give us a really good perspective on the systems of control.
Mhm.
And like, I I remember even telling my therapist, like, I feel like an anthropologist just studying, like, oh, so like the men come up and they do this, and then like, and then this is how people are engaging with each other, and then they say this, and then they say that, and like,
Yes. Yeah, so much observing, like how to do this humaning thing. How are other people
yes,
doing it? Okay, I think I've got it down. Yeah. And that's what
yeah,
masking is, right? Like we're mimicking what we see other people doing, but not necessarily connecting to like why are we doing this? This is just the thing that everybody's doing, and I guess like I'll fall in line, but this doesn't make sense.
yes, yeah. I think the shift from like I'm the problem to being like, wait, like either sometimes it's just like things aren't clicking, which is like not necessarily anyone's fault, or like, wait, there's like a whole system of things that
Yeah,
ways that we're taught to be and socialized to be. And like I feel like it's all connected. Like it all ties into like being in a place that has a deep history of racism, and like that ties into the gender norms and the like neurotypical expectations of how our brain should work, how we should talk, how we should think. Like it's all interconnected.
yeah,
So I think that's actually helpful for me to remember, because I'm like, and I'm not going to like romanticize other places and cultures, but there have been other cultures where trans people have been like really honored and had a very sacred, deep
mm,
place in society. So like that
absolutely.
has and still exists. Um, and I like with the amount of people that are neurodivergent and ADHD, I'm like, I feel like, I mean, I don't know, this is my personal perspective, but I feel like we evolved this way for a reason, and like we have something to offer. And so I don't know like what that looked like in the past, but I can dream of the future and be like, okay, what would a future look like where all of us have a place and like we respect everyone for what they can bring to the table?
Yes, I love that. I love that, and I always feel like like I sound like a broken record, but it is like that vision is so expansive, right? Because we're not like which box do you fit in, but just like, hey, person, what is important to you? What is exciting to you? Okay, let's match you with other people who care about that or with opportunities to do that thing in exchange for resources that you need, right? Like what a dream. I was daydreaming about like what if the hiring
Yes.
process was like that? What if what if we hired based on like fit with values and culture, and then like okay, yeah, you're a fit, like come be a part of our company, and then we start out like, so what do you like to do? Are you a numbers person? Are you a writer person, creative? Do you really love spreadsheets? Like, let's fit you where you fit once you're inside the company. And I think like that would kind of be
Mm.
dreamy, because sometimes we have like random pairings of skill sets, right? Like I love a good spreadsheet, and also I love creative chaos. Those two things don't necessarily go together tradition or like in the mainstream thought world. But sometimes
Yeah.
folks are like, I really want to exercise my brain in this like really logical, technical way. And also I want some creative outlet. But those are not often like folded into one role or
Mm.
one task.
Yeah.
Got all excited about.
No,
Love
I love it. I
dreaming.
love hearing it. Because also it does feel like, I mean, again, like not to put everything into a box, but I'm like, I do feel like a lot of times neurodivergent people are the ones who are like, do we have to do it like this?
Right.
Like, why are we doing this? It doesn't really seem like the most effective way, and people don't necessarily even seem that happy with it.
Right.
Like, could we do it like this other way maybe, or like play with it or explore, experiment? Like, it also makes me think of nature. Like, in the natural world, like everything has its place. Like, even the gooey bugs and like the birds, like everything balances each other out, and it all kind of flows together. But
Mm-hmm.
I also like what you said about like how, yeah, people may want to do one thing that's considered in this one category and this other thing that's considered in another group. And it's like, why can't we just let people be our whole human selves and do what works for us?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And when you said nature, I think about just these extraordinary images that I've seen, whether it's um like I guess one of my special interests is Chernobyl. And so I've like read and looked at a lot of photos around that event. And I'm particularly fascinated with the way that life has grown up and around and through like these structures that humans have built and abandoned. Right. And so I think about like nature finds a way. Like flowers are grown up through concrete, trees grow themselves around fences and poles and over sidewalks, right? Like they find a way to accommodate. They're not a like nature is rarely one way. And
Absolutely.
and that's such an inspiring model, right? Of like there are many ways. And you know, the way I see it in systems is you know, back in white supremacy, it's the origin of all the like, this is the way,
Yep.
right? And out of that came religious teachings of this is the way. And out
Mm.
of that came, you know, let's build an education system. This is the way to measure, to teach, to whatever. And so I think part of what we find that's so challenging when we have these like creative out of the box ways of thinking about things is we're met with, but this is how we've always done it. And this is the way that has been taught. Even in business, we've had conversations. I think you and I have had conversations. I've had conversations with other folks. Just being neurodivergent in business, we do business differently. We do marketing differently. We connect with people differently. And so we need resources that support the way that our brains do business. Because when we try to, I've experienced this when I try to fit into like the mainstream business teachings, I'm like, I'm failing at everything. I'm doing everything wrong. And this feels
Mm.
gross. Like,
Yeah.
no, like
Yes.
I'm not, I'm not failing and doing it wrong. I have a different way of doing it. And different is just different. It's
Absolutely.
not a valued or moralized thing.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I was just thinking, it's like, I feel like for me, like learning how to work with my own neurodivergence, learning how to express gender in a way that feels good to me, like that feels like working with my own nature, you know, because we are nature. We're like, newsflash, we're animals. Like, what? Like, and and it's like, I think that, yeah, going back to what you're saying too, it's like, yeah, I feel like in white supremacy and colonial culture, there's kind of this idea where it's like, okay, we need to put this building here. It's like, what if it disrupts the ecosystem? What if, like, we're like, you know, versus like, okay, could we create and build in a way where it's like we work with nature? Um, so, I mean, and then I think I'm also thinking about Robin Wall Kimmerer in the book Braiding Sweetgrass, and how she talks about like, actually, like certain ways that Indigenous people harvest actually benefits the land and the plants that they're harvesting, and the plants thrive. So like, what's going wrong that we're not doing that?
Right. Right. Yeah, going on that, I think about the, what did they call it? The three sisters of corn and corn and beans and
Mm,
something else, like the
squash?
squash. Yes. So these three plants are planted together because together they provide their own little ecosystem of like bug repellent and, you know, this one puts stuff into the soil that this one needs, right? Like there's a reason
Yes.
they're planted together. And I was also reading about this other gardening project. Like the garden was beautiful, and it was just these, I don't know, it was like concentric circles of different fruits and vegetables that, you know, usually see, like here's the this patch and here's the this patch. But so many times there's like a symbiosis of these plants work together to protect each other. And so there's value in planting them together versus just like acres and
Yes.
acres and acres of only wheat or acres and acres and acres of only corn. Um, and something you said about our nature. Oh, I like what you said about the more you're learning about yourself, the more that you can like structure a life that goes in harmony with who you are and what your needs are. And that just made me think of this phrase that I love, like rewilding. Like, oh
Mm,
yeah, kind of like rewilding ourselves, like letting ourselves go. I guess this is kind of how I imagine imagery around masking. Like masking means we have to like tuck everything in and take up as little space as possible and
mm,
just like fall in line. And when I think about unmasking, I think about taking up space, and I think about like letting things grow a little bit wild and letting things go to see like, let me follow that versus this is how it's going to be and everything has to fall in line with this.
yes. 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 I love what you're sharing. And even just when you're talking about like the three sisters, and it also makes me think about community and like, yeah, we do have this very ableist idea that like we're which is so absurd, that like anyone can do anything alone. Like you're supposed to do everything on your own and function fully on your own. But I'm like, when I go to the bathroom and I turn on my sink, like there's so many things that are in play for that to happen, and so many people, and like the rivers, and like the whole nature, like ecosystem that like has to come together for me to have water coming out of my sink. So all these billionaires or whoever, like who are like, I did it on my own. It's like, and then of course, you know, there's like nepotism and all the layers there too.
Yeah.
But like I feel like then those of us that do struggle to like thrive in this system, sometimes we get kind of going back to what you're saying about feeling like I'm wrong or something's wrong with me, and there's the gaslighting. It's like, well, why can't you just thrive in the system on your own and figure it out? And it's like, part of what I'm coming to realize and have been embracing is, for me, unmasking, coming to terms with my own needs. It doesn't mean that, I mean, I guess on one hand, I have tools and skills that I can use to help me. And like part of that is like knowing when to use my headphones, knowing when to take a sensory break. But then also part of that is like asking for help, asking for accommodations, and like leaning on friends. I've been practicing like making meals with a friend. Like we'll make them together and then we'll swap meals, because like cooking can be hard.
Yes.
And then, other days I'll have like frozen meals. I try to have food that's like different levels of intensity to make, depending on like how I'm feeling physically and mentally and
Yeah.
emotionally that day. So things that I can just pop in the microwave if I just don't have the time or energy, or things that like I can cook a little more. But yeah, it's just like, I mean, I feel like humans are, to a degree, fairly social creatures. And I do know that like some of us do like to spend a lot of time alone. But
Mhm.
even then, it's like, what if we had ways of like supporting each other, even if it didn't mean like talking to each other or like engaging in these typical ways, but like we support each other with food and like body doubling
Right.
or whatever. So, um, yeah. And I think that there's not, from the way that I do coaching, it's not like, okay, you're going to go from how you are now to like this perfect person that does everything like in this perfect way. It's more like, okay, how can we find like what works for you, and then also like what tools and resources are maybe already available that we can tap into or build or create.
Mhm.
And then how can I show up too? Like how can we
Yeah.
work in that way? So
I love that. I love that. That made me think about like, ooh, maybe that's why I have such a difficult time in like identifying the outcomes. Like, it's another part of like mainstream
mm,
marketing. Like, what are the outcomes that your clients are getting? I'm like, I like it's different for every person because
yeah.
they come with different needs. But yeah, it's also I think I've had trouble naming it because the outcome is so much about like in the group coaching program I provide, like the outcome is having had an experience where neurodivergence is centered and celebrated and affirmed across the board, right? Like
Mm,
that's the experience, being like showing up to a call knowing like, hey, I'm not feeling it, so I'm gonna have my camera off, and that's okay. Nobody's judging me, nobody's like putting pressure, right? Like that. Like that's what I provide. And I know from my experience that when people have that space and that experience for long enough, there are all these other byproducts of that, right? Like growing in confidence and
yeah.
finding relationships that align with them, right? Those are byproducts, but those are not necessarily like what we focus on. What we focus on is we're creating this space that's different than any other space that you exist in. And within this space, we get to try on different parts of ourselves. We get to, practice with other people who are going to be gentle and understanding and on our similar wavelength so that when we leave this experience, we can carry ourselves into the world with like, I don't care what people think about how I do things.
Mm,
Like I've been validated in that enough externally to be able to validate myself in that and move forward with confidence, whatever that is, and like career changes or launching a business or scaling a business. But yeah,
yes.
that's not like, you know, that's not, it's more organic than it is like a manualized step by step thing that somebody can go through.
Absolutely. And I think it does make talking about the work harder. Or at least I'm trying to reframe that because I'm like, is that what it is? Or like at least it's like a challenge and an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to trying to reframe challenges. Because I feel like when there
Yeah.
is something that's not working in the way that you expect it to or want it to, sometimes there's like an unseen opportunity there that is like something that's needed. Um, at
Yeah.
least that's how I've been trying to view it. And yeah. And it does feel like a little countercultural in a way where um yeah, like sometimes we want to have things that are like you know exactly what to expect and like promising these outcomes, and it's like I don't know, I feel like to a degree we can be like this is what other people have gained from this experience, or but like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't feel very accommodating to be like everyone's going to have this result from this experience. So it's like, okay, so how do we talk about this?
Right. Which I think is an important piece of the conversation, because if we as autistic ADHD people are talking differently about the work that we do, and also for many of us, we want to work with other neurodivergent folks because we want to be a support system. So also, like, I know for me as an autistic ADHD person, I I respond differently to different messaging, right? So like
Mm,
the way that I'm going to create marketing is different, and also the way that other neurodivergent people want to consume marketing is different, right? So there's
yeah,
like both sides of that conversation. Um, that I think you're right. Like it is a challenge because we are creating it. We don't have a model yet because not enough of us like we ourselves are just coming into this identity. I'm like 2 years in,
mhm.
and you know, I think for many of us, we're just like, oh, like we don't have any resources for ourselves. Like, I guess we
Yeah,
better create the structure that we need. Um, and which, I think is exciting for some of us who like love innovation and creating something out of nothing. And also there's parts of it, it's like, man, I would love to just like have something and not have to build it first before I can have it.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
I think one of the things that I do love is like these kinds of conversations. I think through these conversations we are co-creating these moments of validation and affirmation for each other. Like conversation is
Yeah,
nourishing me, and I'm gonna put it up on YouTube in the hope that it will nourish other people and they will see reflections of themselves in things that you've said and things that I've said, and feel less alone, less alien, and like, okay, so there's people. Let me gravitate toward them, and together we can work on building this thing that has not existed yet, or already existed because indigenous people built it, and like we want to return back to some of that wisdom that
mm,
uh, was crushed.
yeah, yeah. It feels very, I would say, countercultural, but then also like I try to remind myself too, like there is a wave of us who are trying to do this, but it
Mhm.
doesn't make it easy. But because it still is like we are going against these systems and these norms, and um, yeah, I feel like there's like a big cultural shift happening right now on so
Mhm.
many levels. Um,
Yeah.
like even with yeah, with like gender identity, trans stuff. And then, there's a big kickback there, which is what it is. But, and then
Yeah.
with neurodivergence, there's just a huge wave of discussion and conversation about this, and people really starting to get diagnosed and self-identify. And I feel like it's kind of an exciting and scary time. And we're trying to
Yeah.
do something. Yeah, we're trying to go against these structures of how we were raised and told that we should do things. So I think it's important. And and then I also am trying to remember that what success looks like in this way, because I am shifting away from these traditional systems. It's I can't view my success based on how they view success.
Right. Right. It's like you said at the beginning, we use this language and that's what we've got, but the language itself was created out of this oppressive system. So even that, we are creating new definitions of what is success, right? Even for myself, success
Yes.
is me taking care of myself, listening to my body, and going at a pace that is healthy versus hustle and grind culture, right? But that also
Yes.
means that I'm not necessarily reflecting financial success as fast as someone else, right? So those definitions begin to change. What is success? What is accomplishment? Who are we deciding gets to author those definitions? And can there be more than one definition?
Absolutely.
So many.
Yeah.
That's a whole other conversation.
I know. I'm everything. There's just so many different ways we could go with all of it.
Well, it has been such a pleasure talking with you today. And just, I am so appreciative for you sharing more about yourself so that we can share you with the world. If people want to learn more about what you do, if they want to connect with you in coaching, how do they find you?
Yeah. So I have my website, and then I'm also on social media. And so it's my business is Rainbow Chrysalis Coaching. So I guess it's just a simple way to remember that is to think about I think of a rainbow as something that can't be put in a box
I
and
love that.
is an experience made up of all these factors. Um, and then the chrysalis for me is very symbolic of going through transformation and also holding space, being in a space where you can transform and let go and change. And so I love the butterfly transformation. It feels like a very visual way to think about
Yeah.
the cycles of change that I feel like I'm always on. I think many of us are constantly moving through. So yeah, the rainbowchrysaliscoaching.com is my website. And then on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram, I'm less on Facebook. So TikTok and Instagram are my main ones, is at Rainbow Chrysalis Coaching.
All right. And I'll include
So
all those links in the notes so people can just click through and find you. Do you have any special events coming up or things that you especially want folks to know about throughout the spring?
yeah, so I don't have any. I'm brewing and scheming.
Love
Some
it.
things, and they're in the works, but they're not in a place to advertise yet. But I mean, I guess the best way to make sure that you're getting updates about events is probably my mailing list. But if you don't
Perfect.
want to be on that, social media is another way to find out. So right now, I would just say my one-on-one sessions. I offer one-on-one sessions. Also, I can work with families or groups, if some people have trouble understanding an identity and we all want to talk through it together. So yeah, I think the one-on-ones are the thing I'm talking about the most right now, but there's more to come.
Yay, that's exciting. I mean, I'm very much a seasonal person, so I get excited about ooh, what blooms are going to burst forth in spring. And I know you
Yes.
also for folks who may join your social media, you also offer some pop-up events periodically of just like, hey, here's a spontaneous offering, which is really neat and an exciting way of like getting to know your style. So folks can look out for that as well. Thank you so
For
much for
sure.
being here and sharing space together. And yeah, we'll talk again soon.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. This was lovely.
You're welcome.